Elise Morgan had built her empire from nothing. But as flight attendants forced her from first class to economy, she wondered if all her success meant nothing at 30,000 feet. The plane began to taxi, then suddenly stopped. A voice crackled over the intercom that would change everything. This flight doesn't leave until Elise is back in 1A. Passengers turned to stare as the cockpit door opened, and out stepped a pilot who looked exactly like the woman they'd just humiliated. What happened next would expose a system that had tried to diminish them both, and prove that sometimes family bonds are stronger than corporate policies. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of the Morgan Industries headquarters, its golden light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of downtown San Francisco. Elise Morgan stood in her corner office on the 42nd floor, her silhouette framed against the sprawling cityscape that stretched toward the bay, where container ships moved like distant toys between the towering supports of the Golden Gate Bridge. At 35, she was the youngest black woman to build a technology company valued at over $200 million, her name appearing regularly on Forbes lists and her face gracing the covers of business magazines that had once seemed as unreachable as the stars she'd watched from the fire escape of her childhood apartment in Oakland. The office itself was a testament to her journey from poverty to power, decorated with artifacts that told the story of her rise while remaining grounded in the values that had sustained her through years of struggle and determination. A framed photograph of her parents sat prominently on her desk, their proud faces captured at her Stanford graduation, their sacrifices having made possible the education that became the foundation of her success. Next to it, a smaller frame held a picture of her older brother Marcus in his Navy dress uniform, taken the day he received his wings, and began the journey that would eventually lead him to the cockpit of commercial crane aircraft, fulfilling the childhood dream that had sustained him through their family's darkest financial struggles. The mahogany desk, imported from sustainable forests in South America, held the tools of modern executive power, multiple monitors displaying real-time data about her company's operations across 3 continents, secure phones connecting her to clients and partners from Silicon Valley to Singapore, and tablets loaded with presentations that could determine the fate of multi-million-dollar contracts. But it was the simple wooden box in the corner of the desk that held her most treasured possessions. Letters from students who'd received scholarships through her foundation, thank you notes from employees whose children had benefited from the company's education programs, and handwritten messages from young entrepreneurs who'd been inspired by her example to pursue their own dreams despite the obstacles society placed in their paths. The company Elise had built, Morgan Industries, specialized in artificial intelligence solutions for healthcare, education, and social services, areas where technology could make the greatest impact on, underserved communities. Her philosophy was simple but revolutionary: that innovation should serve everyone, not just the wealthy and connected, and that diversity and development teams produced better solutions for diverse populations. This approach had attracted top talent from around the world and clients who shared her vision of technology as a force for social good. But it had also earned her enemies among competitors who saw her success as a threat to their traditional dominance of the industry. The walls of her office displayed awards and recognitions that marked milestones in her company's growth. From the Small Business Achievement Award she'd received in her first year of operation, to the Presidential Medal for Innovation in Technology that had been presented just 6 months earlier. But between these formal acknowledgments were personal touches that revealed the woman behind the executive persona. Artwork created by students in schools her company had helped modernize, photographs from community events where she'd volunteered alongside her employees, and a collection of books by Black authors whose stories had sustained her through moments of doubt and discrimination. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting her morning review of quarterly reports that showed continued growth across all divisions of her company. Ms. Morgan, your car is here for the airport. Flight 447 to New York departs at 11:30. And you have the board meeting with Hartwell Industries tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. The presentation materials are already loaded on your tablet, and I'd confirmed your reservation at the plaza. Elise gathered the leather portfolio that contained backup copies of every document she might need for tomorrow's crucial meeting. Her movements precise and economical in the way of someone who'd learned to manage time and resources with ruthless efficiency. The Hartwell Industries contract represented more than just another business opportunity. It was validation that her company had reached the level where Fortune 500 corporations would consider them as primary technology partners rather than diverse suppliers brought in to meet inclusion requirements. The $47 million deal would establish Morgan Industries as a major player in the digital transformation market, opening doors to clients who had previously been beyond her reach. The elevator ride to the ground floor gave her a few moments to center herself for the day ahead. Practicing the breathing exercises she'd learned during her Stanford MBA program, when the pressure of competing with classmates who'd attended elite prep schools and had family connections throughout the business world had threatened to overwhelm her. She'd survived those challenges by outworking everyone around her, staying in the library until security guards asked her to leave, and building relationships with professors who recognized her potential despite her lack of pedigree or connections. The lobby of her building buzzed with the controlled energy of a successful business district, lawyers and consultants and executives moving between meetings that would determine the fate of deals worth billions of dollars. Elise had become part of this world through determination and excellence, but she never forgot that her presence here was still remarkable, still challenged by those who questioned whether a young black woman truly belonged in the highest levels of American business. Every success was a victory not just for her company, but for everyone who'd been told that certain positions were reserved for certain types of people. The ride to San Francisco International Airport took 45 minutes through traffic that reflected the city's prosperity and inequality. Luxury cars sharing lanes with aging buses, carrying workers to service jobs that kept the economic engine running. Elise used the time to review her presentation one final time, though she'd memorized every slide and could recite the financial projections from memory. The preparation was both practical and psychological, a way of maintaining the confidence that would be essential when facing a room full of executives who would be looking for any excuse to dismiss her proposals. The airport terminal was a modern marvel of glass and steel, designed to handle millions of passengers annually while maintaining an atmosphere of calm efficiency. Elise's first-class ticket granted her access to expedited security lines and premium lounges, privileges she'd earned through years of coach flights and red-eye connections while building her business one client, meeting at a time. She'd never forgotten those early days of sleeping in airport chairs and surviving on vending machine food, experiences that kept her grounded despite her current success. Pacific Airways had a reputation for excellent service and modern aircraft, which was why she'd chosen them for this crucial trip to New York. The airline's commitment to customer satisfaction was reflected in everything from their punctual departure times to their well-trained staff, and Elise had been consistently impressed with their professionalism during her previous flights. The first-class cabin offered the space and quiet she needed to arrive at important meetings refreshed and focused, ready to compete against competitors who took such luxuries for granted. Gate 12A displayed the familiar blue and white logo of Pacific Airways, and Flight 4047 was already beginning its boarding process when she arrived. The gate agent scanned Elise's boarding pass with a professional smile, directing her toward the jet bridge that would carry her to the aircraft that would deliver her to the most important presentation of her career. The Boeing 737 was one of the airline's newer planes, equipped with modern amenities and configured for maximum passenger comfort during the cross-country journey. The first-class cabin reflected Pacific Airways' commitment to premium service, with wide leather seats arranged in a 2-2 configuration that provided both privacy and accessibility. Seat 1A was positioned perfectly for her needs, offering window views of the departure process while maintaining easy access to the aisle for conversations with other passengers or trips to the lavatory. She'd specifically requested this seat when making her reservation, understanding that every detail of business travel could impact her performance during crucial meetings. Elise stowed her carry-on bag in the overhead compartment with practiced efficiency, settling into the leather seat that would be her workspace for the next several hours. The other first-class passengers represented the usual mix of business executives and affluent leisure travelers, their expensive clothing and confident demeanor marking them as members of the economic elite who treated premium air travel as a natural right rather than an earned privilege. She'd learned to navigate these social dynamics carefully, presenting herself as a peer while remaining alert to the subtle signs of prejudice that could emerge when her presence was perceived as inappropriate or threatening. The flight attendant who approached her was young and blonde, her uniform immaculate, and her smile professionally pleasant, but somehow lacking the warmth that usually characterized interactions in first class. There was something in her expression that made Elise look up from her tablet, where she'd been reviewing market research data for the 20th time, a subtle shift in body language that suggested the conversation would be more complicated than a simple offer of pre-flight beverages. "Ms. Morgan?" the flight attendant said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty that seemed inappropriate for someone trained to handle complex passenger situations. "I need to speak with you about your seating assignment." The words triggered an immediate sense of alertness at Elise, the same heightened awareness that had served her well in boardrooms where subtle challenges to her authority required quick recognition and strategic response. She'd encountered this tone before, the carefully modulated voice of someone preparing to deliver news that would be unwelcome but would be presented as non-negotiable policy rather than personal preference. "Is there a problem with my reservation?" Elise asked, keeping her voice level and professional despite the tension she could feel building in her chest. "There seems to be a ticketing error with your seat assignment. We're going to need to move you to a different location in the cabin." The euphemistic language was familiar to Elise from years of corporate negotiations where bad news was always wrapped in neutral terminology designed to minimize resistance and emotional response. But the implication was clear enough. Her confirmed first-class reservation was being challenged, and she was expected to accept whatever alternative arrangement the airline chose to offer without question or end. Complaint. What kind of ticketing error? Elise pressed, pulling out her phone to display the confirmation email that clearly showed her first-class reservation with specific seat assignment. "My reservation was confirmed 48 hours ago, and I have documentation of my ticket purchase and seat selection." The flight attendant's expression remained carefully neutral, but Elise caught a flicker of something in her eyes that she recognized from countless business meetings where her presence had been questioned. It was the look of someone who'd made a decision based on assumptions rather than facts, who'd judged her worthiness for first-class accommodations based on appearance rather than payment and status. "Unfortunately, there was an overbooking situation, and we need to accommodate a passenger with higher elite status than your current level." The explanation was delivered with the kind of bureaucratic authority that was meant to end discussion, but Elise had spent too many years fighting for respect and recognition to accept such treatment without challenge. She was a platinum-level frequent flyer with Pacific Airways, having earned that status through hundreds of thousands of miles of business travel, and there were very few passenger categories that would outrank her priority for DAS. Seat assignments. "I'm platinum status with Pacific Airways," Elise said calmly, "which according to your own published policies gives me priority for seat assignments and upgrades. I'd like to see documentation of this supposed higher status passenger who's displacing me from my confirmed seat." The conversation was beginning to attract attention from other passengers, their curious glances carrying the weight of judgment that Elise had learned to ignore but never quite escaped. She could see the calculations in their expressions, the assumptions being made about her right to occupy premium space, the questions about whether she truly belonged in first class or had somehow gained access through mistake or affirmative action programs. The flight attendant glanced around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the dispute, but committed to her course of action. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I need you to gather your belongings and move to seat 23C in economy class. This decision has been approved by management, and your ticket will be refunded the fare bar." Difference. The dismissive tone was like a physical blow, carrying implications that went far beyond a simple seating dispute. Elise felt the familiar rage that came with being treated as disposable, despite her achievements and status. The anger that had fueled her rise from poverty to prominence, but that she'd learned to channel into productive action rather than destructive confrontation. She'd built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, employed over 300 people across multiple continents, and paid more in federal taxes last year than most people earned in a decade. But apparently none of that mattered when a flight attendant decided she didn't belong in first class. "I want to speak to the captain," Elise said quietly, her voice carrying the authority she'd developed through years of commanding boardrooms and negotiating with Fortune 500 executives. "This is clearly a discriminatory action disguised as a policy issue, and I want it addressed by someone with actual authority to resolve the situation." "The captain is busy with pre-flight preparations and can't be disturbed for passenger service issues," the flight attendant replied, her tone becoming more clipped and dismissive. "I need you to move to your new seat assignment now so we can complete boarding and maintain our departure schedule." Around them, the normal rhythm of air travel continued as other passengers boarded and settled into their assigned seats. But Elise could feel the weight of their attention as they witnessed a confrontation that had implications far beyond airline customer service. She was facing a decision that felt loaded with significance, caught between her desire to fight for principle and her need to arrive in New York calm and focused for tomorrow's crucial presentation. The businessman who was apparently taking her seat appeared at the boarding door, his expensive suit and entitled demeanor marking him as someone accustomed to getting his way through wealth and social position rather than merit or achievement. He moved through the cabin with the confidence of someone who'd never had his right to premium accommodations questioned, never been forced to justify his presence in spaces reserved for the privileged elite. Elise watched him settle into seat 1A with casual ownership, as if the discrimination required to give him that seat was simply the natural order of things. The weight of the Hartwell presentation pressed against her consciousness, reminding her that arriving in New York angry and rattled would undermine everything she'd worked to achieve over the past 6 months of preparation. The contract was too important to jeopardize over a seating dispute, no matter how unjust or discriminatory it felt. She'd learned to pick her battles carefully, understanding that the war for respect and recognition was won through strategic choices rather than emotional reactions that could be used to justify stereotypes about difficult customers and angry minorities. "Fine," Elise said finally, gathering her belongings with movements that betrayed none of the fury burning in her chest. "But I want documentation of this incident, including the name and status level of the passenger who supposedly outranks my confirmed reservation, and a full explanation of the policy that allows paid customers to be bumped from their assigned seats without justification." The flight attendant's relief was palpable as Elise stood and retrieved her carry-on bag from the overhead compartment, but she made no move to provide the documentation that had been requested. "Of course, ma'am. We'll make sure you receive all the appropriate paperwork once we're in the air." The walk from first class to economy felt like a march of shame, past passengers who watched with expressions ranging from sympathetic embarrassment to satisfied judgment. Elise kept her chin up and her stride confident, refusing to show the humiliation that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. She'd survived worse than this, overcome obstacles that would have crushed people with less determination and support. And she wouldn't let one ignorant flight attendant derail the momentum she'd built over years of excellence. Achievement. Seat 23C was a middle seat between a businessman who smelled like stale coffee and cheap cologne and a college student whose headphones were loud enough to disturb everyone within 3 rows. The contrast with first class was jarring. not just in terms of physical comfort, but in the psychological space it provided for preparation and focus. Here, surrounded by crying children and arguing couples, it would be impossible to maintain the calm concentration she needed for tomorrow's presentation. The aircraft began its taxi toward the runway, joining the queue of departing flights that moved through San Francisco International Airport's complex system of taxiways and holding areas. Through the small window, Elise could see other planes taking off and landing in carefully choreographed sequences that connected her city to destinations around the world. Soon they'd be airborne, leaving behind the place where she'd built her empire and carrying her toward the meeting that could define the next phase of her career and her company's growth. But as the plane moved through the departure sequence, something unexpected happened. The aircraft slowed, then stopped completely on the taxiway, its engines still running but its forward progress halted for reasons that weren't immediately apparent to the passengers. The captain's voice hadn't provided any explanation, and the flight attendant seemed as confused as everyone else about the sudden delay. Elise checked her watch, noting that they were already running behind schedule, every minute of delay increasing the risk that she'd arrive in New York feeling rushed and unprepared for tomorrow's crucial meeting. She'd built contingency time into her travel plans, but extended delays could affect her ability to review materials one final time and get the rest she needed to perform at her peak level. The minutes stretched by with no explanation, passengers becoming increasingly restless as the unexplained delay continued. Some began checking their phones for flight status updates, while others called flight attendants to demand information about when they might actually depart for New York. The crew seemed genuinely puzzled by the situation, checking with ground control and maintenance personnel but receiving no clear answers about the cause of the delay. Then the intercom crackled to life, and a male voice filled the cabin with words that would transform everything Elise thought she knew about her morning flight. The tone was calm but determined, carrying an edge of authority that immediately commanded attention from every passenger and crew member aboard the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a delay this morning due to a passenger service issue that needs to be resolved before we can continue our journey to New York." The announcement was vague enough to be meaningless, but something in the pilot's voice suggested that this wasn't a routine operational issue. Elise had flown enough to recognize the difference between standard delays caused by air traffic control or mechanical problems in situations that required special handling by senior crew members. The captain's tone carried an undercurrent of controlled anger that seemed disproportionate to whatever minor customer service problem could have caused them to stop on the taxiway. "I want to be very clear about something," the voice continued, and now Elise could hear barely suppressed fury beneath the professional tone. "This flight will not depart until passenger Elise Morgan has returned to her originally assigned seat in first class. This is not a request, it's a requirement for the continuation of this flight." The cabin fell silent except for the hum of the aircraft's environmental systems, and Elise felt every eye in economy turning toward her with expressions of confusion, curiosity, and dawning understanding. Her name had just been broadcast to every passenger on the plane. Her seating dispute elevated from personal humiliation to public spectacle by a pilot she'd never met, but who seemed determined to defend her right to the accommodation she'd paid for and confirmed. In first class, raised voices could be heard as flight attendants argued among themselves about how to handle a situation that had spiraled beyond their training and authority. The passenger who'd taken Elise's seat was demanding to know why his comfort was being sacrificed for some woman in economy, his entitlement crackling through the cabin like static electricity that charged the atmosphere with tension and uncertainty. The cockpit door opened with a decisive click, and the pilot emerged into the first-class cabin, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone within sight. He was tall and imposing in his captain's uniform, the 4 gold stripes on his shoulders marking him as someone with ultimate authority over the aircraft and everyone aboard it. His bearing suggested military training and years of experience handling crisis situations, but there was something personal in his expression that went beyond professional duty. Captain Marcus Morgan walked down the aisle toward economy with the confident stride of someone who'd never learned to doubt his right to occupy any space he chose. At 37, he'd achieved his childhood dream of becoming a commercial airline pilot, earning his captain's stripes through the same combination of excellence and determination that had driven his younger sister to the top of the technology industry. The gold bars on his shoulders represented thousands of hours of flight time and responsibility for the lives of countless passengers. But right now, his only concern was protecting his family from discrimination he'd witnessed too many times to ignore. As he moved through the cabin, Marcus's eyes scanned the faces of passengers with the trained assessment of someone who'd learned to read situations quickly and accurately. He could see the mixture of confusion and anticipation in their expressions, the way they leaned forward to catch every word of conversations that might explain the unprecedented delay. But his focus was fixed on the economy section, where he knew his sister was sitting in humiliation that no amount of professional success should have to endure. The recognition was mutual and immediate when their eyes met across the cramped economy cabin. Elise saw her older brother, the boy who'd shared her childhood bedroom in their family's small Oakland apartment, who'd walked her to school when their neighborhood was too dangerous for a young girl to travel alone, who'd helped her with calculus homework while working 2 part-time jobs to save money for flight training at the local community college. Marcus saw his brilliant little sister, the woman who'd turned a computer science degree into a business empire, who'd proved that excellence could overcome prejudice but shouldn't have to endure the kind of systematic humiliation she'd just experienced. "Elise," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of shared history and mutual protection that had sustained them through childhood poverty and adult challenges. "I think there's been a serious misunderstanding about your seating assignment that needs immediate correction." The entire cabin was watching now, passengers craning their necks to witness a confrontation that had transformed a routine flight into something approaching family drama with implications that extended far beyond airline customer service. The flight attendant who'd moved Elise from first class stood frozen in the aisle, her face pale as she realized that the passenger she'd dismissed as unworthy of premium seating was related to the pilot who held absolute authority over whether the plane would ever leave the ground. Several passengers began recording the interaction with their phones, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented that would likely become viral content within hours of reaching social media platforms. The businessman who'd taken Elise's first-class seat appeared in the economy aisle, his expensive suit and entitled demeanor now seeming less impressive in the presence of a captain whose authority superseded any customer complaints or corporate policies. "Captain Morgan," the flight attendant said carefully, her voice shaking slightly as she tried to maintain professional composure while dealing with a situation that had escalated far beyond her training. "This is highly irregular. Company policy doesn't allow flight delays over passenger seating disputes, regardless of the circumstances." Marcus turned toward her with the calm authority of someone who'd spent years making life-and-death decisions at 35,000 feet, his expression revealing nothing of the personal investment he had in the situation's resolution. "Actually, I have ultimate authority over this aircraft and the safety of everyone aboard it, which includes ensuring that all passengers are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve as paying customers. Right now, I'm concerned about our compliance with anti-discrimination policies and whether this airline is living up to its stated commitment to treat all customers equally." The words were carefully chosen, professional enough to avoid immediate disciplinary action, but pointed enough to make his position crystal clear to everyone within hearing range. As captain, Marcus had both the legal authority and moral responsibility to ensure that his aircraft operated in accordance with safety regulations and company policies, which explicitly prohibited discrimination based on race, gender, or other protected characteristics. The removal of a confirmed first-class passenger to accommodate someone else's preferences clearly violated those standards. The station manager appeared at the aircraft door, her corporate authority evident in the way flight attendants straightened their postures and modulated their voices upon her arrival. Jennifer Walsh was a 20-year veteran of the airline industry who'd handled everything from mechanical emergencies to unruly passengers. But she'd never faced a situation where a captain had essentially taken his aircraft hostage to protest discriminatory treatment of a family member. "Captain Morgan," Walsh said as she approached, her tone carefully neutral. "I'm the station manager for Pacific Airways here at SFO. I understand there's been a passenger service issue that's causing delays to our scheduled departure." Marcus nodded toward Elise, who was gathering her belongings with quiet dignity while surrounded by passengers whose phones were capturing every moment of the confrontation. "Ms. Da." Morgan was removed from her confirmed first-class seat to accommodate another passenger, despite having valid documentation of her reservation and Platinum Elite status with this airline. "I'd like her returned to seat 1A so we can continue to New York on schedule." Walsh's eyes moved between Marcus and Elise, and understanding dawned in her expression as she recognized the family resemblance and realized the implications of the situation she was facing. Pacific Airways couldn't afford the negative publicity that would come from discriminating against a successful black businesswoman, especially when that discrimination was being challenged by her brother, who happened to be one of their most experienced and respected pilots. The potential for viral social media content and mainstream news coverage made this a corporate crisis that required immediate and keen, decisive action. "Of course," Walsh said smoothly, her corporate training taking over as she recognized the need to diffuse a situation that could damage the airline's reputation permanently. "There seems to have been a significant misunderstanding with our seating procedures. We'll have Ms. Morgan return to first class immediately, and I'll personally ensure that our customer service standards are properly enforced." The businessman who'd taken Elise's seat was relocated to a different first-class seat, with profuse apologies and promises of complimentary upgrades for future flights. His earlier entitlement replaced by embarrassment at his unwitting participation in what was clearly discriminatory treatment. The flight attendant who'd initiated the confrontation was quietly removed from the aircraft and replaced with a supervisor who treated Elise with the respect due to any premium passenger, regardless of their relationship to the flight crew. As Elise gathered her belongings and prepared to return to first class, she felt a complex mixture of gratitude, vindication, and frustration. Her brother's intervention had restored her dignity and demonstrated that family bonds could overcome institutional bias. But it also highlighted the reality that her individual success and status hadn't been enough to protect her from discrimination. Without Marcus's presence and authority, she would have spent the flight cramped in economy, her confidence shaken, and her preparation time compromised by the psychological impact of being treated as a second-class citizen. The aircraft finally began its journey toward the runway after nearly an hour of beach delay. But the extra time had been worth it to establish important principles about passenger rights and corporate responsibility. The other first-class passengers treated Elise with newfound respect, their earlier indifference replaced by careful courtesy that acknowledged both her brother's authority and her own obvious importance in whatever business had brought her to New York. Marcus returned to the cockpit once the situation was resolved, but not before stopping by his sister's seat for a brief conversation that carried the weight of their shared experiences and mutual support. The other passengers watched this interaction with fascination, understanding that they'd witnessed something unprecedented in commercial aviation, a captain who'd risked his career to defend his family members' dignity and rights. "You okay?" Marcus asked quietly, his concern genuine, despite the professional facade he maintained in front of passengers who were still processing what they'd witnessed. "I'm fine now," Elise replied, though they both knew the incident had affected her more deeply than she wanted to admit. "Thank you for standing up for me. I know that couldn't have been easy, given your position with the airline." "You don't need to thank me for doing what's right," Marcus said simply. "Besides, You'd do the same for me if our positions were reversed." The simple truth of that statement settled between them, a reminder of the bond that had sustained them through childhood poverty and adult challenges that had tested their individual resolve and family loyalty. They'd always protected each other, whether from neighborhood bullies or corporate discrimination, understanding that their success was interconnected and that lifting each other up was essential to overcoming the obstacles society placed in their paths. The flight to New York proceeded without further incident, though the earlier confrontation had transformed the cabin atmosphere in subtle but significant ways. Other passengers treated Elise with a respect that felt genuine rather than obligatory, several introducing themselves and expressing interest in her business once they learned she was a successful technology entrepreneur. The flight attendants were attentive without being obsequious, providing service that acknowledged her status while maintaining their professional dignity and avoiding any hint of the discrimination that had characterized the Spain. Earlier interaction. Elise used the flight time to review her presentation materials, but her concentration was affected by the morning's events in ways that went beyond simple distraction. The discrimination she'd experienced was nothing new in her career, but having it resolved through her brother's intervention felt both empowering and troubling. She'd built her success on the principle of earning respect through excellence and achievement. But this incident reminded her that external validation often depended on having allies with power and influence who were willing to use their positions to defend principle over convenience. The Hartwell Industries presentation loomed larger now, carrying additional weight as proof that her achievements were substantial enough to command respect, regardless of family connections or protective interventions. She needed this contract not just for her company's financial health, but for the personal validation it would provide. Confirmation that her work and vision were compelling enough to overcome whatever prejudices or preconceptions might exist among potential clients and partners. As the plane began its descent into New York airspace, Elise reflected on the morning's events and their implications for her business relationships and personal identity. The incident would likely generate media attention, potentially casting her company in a positive light as being led by someone who stood up to discrimination and had family support in that fight. But it might also reinforce stereotypes about difficult customers and problem passengers, regardless of the facts of the situation or the discriminatory behavior that had precipitated the confrontation. The landing at JFK was smooth, Marcus's skill evident in the gentle touchdown that barely registered as contact with the runway, despite the crosswinds that often challenged pilots approaching New York's busiest airport. As passengers began gathering their belongings and preparing to disembark, several approached Elise to express support for her position and admiration for her brother's principled intervention. The businessman who'd initially taken her seat offered an awkward but seemingly sincere apology, his earlier entitlement replaced by embarrassment at his role in what he now understood had been discriminatory treatment. The jet bridge provided welcome escape from the confined aircraft environment, and Elise walked toward the terminal with renewed determination and a deeper understanding of the challenges that still existed despite her individual success. The morning's events had been resolved through family loyalty and professional integrity, proving that justice was possible even in situations where power dynamics seemed to favor discrimination and institutional bias over individual rights and dignity. The taxi ride into Manhattan gave her time to process the morning's experiences and refocus on the presentation that would determine her company's future trajectory. The Hartwell Industries building rose from the urban landscape like a monument to corporate power, its glass and steel facade reflecting the ambitions and dreams of countless executives who'd passed through its doors seeking partnerships and recognition from one of the industry's most influential companies. Today, Elise would add her voice to those seeking validation, but she'd do so with the confidence that came from knowing her family would always support her fight for respect and equality. The presentation went flawlessly, her preparation and expertise overcoming any lingering effects from the morning's discrimination and the psychological impact of being publicly humiliated before being vindicated. The Hartwell board listened attentively to her proposals, asked thoughtful questions about implementation timelines and scalability challenges, and expressed genuine interest in her company's innovative approach to artificial intelligence and digital transformation. By the end of the 3-hour meeting, which included detailed technical discussions and financial projections, Elise felt confident that she'd made a compelling case for partnership that would establish her company as a major player in the industry. The contract award came 5 days later, a $47 million validation of everything she'd worked to achieve over the past decade of building her business. The Hartwell partnership would establish Morgan Industries as a preferred vendor for Fortune 500 digital transformation projects, opening doors to other major clients and providing the financial foundation for ambitious expansion plans that included international offices and research facilities. But more than the monetary value, the contract represented recognition of her expertise and leadership, proof that excellence could overcome prejudice when combined with persistence and family support. News of the airline incident spread rapidly through social media and business publications, generating mostly positive coverage that highlighted both the discrimination Elise had faced and her brother's principled response to injustice. Pacific Airways issued a comprehensive public apology and announced enhanced diversity training programs for customer service personnel, while several civil rights organizations praised Marcus for using his authority to combat bias and protect his family members' dignity. The story became a case study in corporate responsibility courses and airline training programs, demonstrating how individual actions could challenge systemic discrimination. The success of the Hartwell partnership led to additional opportunities and recognition that extended far beyond the immediate financial benefits. Elise received invitations to speak at industry conferences about diversity and inclusion in technology, was invited to serve on corporate boards seeking to improve their diversity profiles, and found herself frequently quoted in business publications as an example of entrepreneurial success despite obstacles. Her company's growth accelerated, adding new divisions focused on healthcare, AI, and educational technology, while expanding into international markets with the confidence that came from proven success. Established credibility. Marcus continued his career with Pacific Airways, eventually becoming a chief pilot responsible for training other aviators and implementing safety protocols that emphasized both technical excellence and ethical leadership. His intervention on behalf of his sister became legendary within the airline industry. A story told in training programs about the importance of treating all passengers with equal respect and the responsibility of authority figures to protect those who might be vulnerable to discrimination. He never regretted the decision to delay the flight, understanding that some principles were worth defending regardless of personal or professional consequences. The relationship between the siblings deepened through their shared experience of discrimination and resistance. Their professional success intertwined with their commitment to supporting each other and challenging injustice wherever they encountered it. They both achieved their childhood dreams despite obstacles that might have defeated people with less determination and family support, proving that individual excellence, combined with mutual loyalty, could overcome even the most entrenched forms of bias and institutional prejudice. Years later, when Elise spoke to young entrepreneurs and aspiring business leaders about building successful companies, she often told the story of that morning flight and her brother's intervention as an example of how success required both individual effort and community support. The lesson wasn't just about the importance of family loyalty, though that was crucial, but about the power of people in positions of authority to challenge systems that perpetuated discrimination and inequality. Change happened when individuals chose to use their influence in service of justice rather than personal convenience or social conformity. The Pacific Airways incident became a turning point in both their careers, demonstrating that success wasn't just about individual achievement, but about using that success to create opportunities and protections for others who might face similar challenges. Elise's company grew into a platform for promoting diversity and inclusion throughout the technology industry, while Marcus became an advocate for equal treatment and respect in aviation and transportation more broadly. Their childhood bond had evolved into a partnership that extended far beyond family loyalty to encompass shared values and common purpose in fighting discrimination. The morning that had begun with institutional discrimination and personal humiliation had transformed into a story of resistance and redemption, proving that sometimes the most important battles were fought not in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the everyday spaces where dignity and respect were either honored or denied. Their success was measured not just in financial terms or professional recognition, but in the changes they'd helped create and the barriers they'd helped remove for those who would follow in their paths and face similar challenges. The flight that had almost begun with injustice had ended with a demonstration of how power could be used to protect rather than oppress, how family bonds could strengthen individual resolve, and how excellence combined with integrity could overcome even the most entrenched forms of discrimination. It was a lesson that would guide both siblings throughout their careers and lives, a reminder that true success meant lifting others up rather than simply rising above the obstacles placed in their paths. The media coverage of the incident extended far beyond the initial viral social media posts, eventually reaching national news programs and business journals that recognized the broader implications of AO. What had occurred on Flight 447? The story resonated with audiences who'd experienced similar discrimination in various contexts, from restaurants that questioned their ability to pay for expensive meals to hotels that claimed not to have records of confirmed reservations when faced with guests who didn't match their preconceptions about appropriate clientele. Elise found herself invited to testify before congressional committees examining discrimination in transportation and commerce. Her articulate description of the incident helping lawmakers understand how bias operated in subtle but significant ways throughout the business world. Her testimony was particularly powerful because she could speak not just as a victim of discrimination, but as a successful entrepreneur, whose achievements demonstrated that such treatment was both wrong and economically counterproductive for companies that practiced it. The congressional hearing room was packed with reporters and advocates when Elise took her seat at the witness table. Her prepared statement outlining not just what had happened on the flight, but the broader patterns of discrimination that successful people of color faced in their professional and personal lives. She spoke about the psychological toll of constantly having to prove her worthiness for basic respect, the energy that was diverted from productive work to defending her right to equal treatment, and the way that individual incidents of bias accumulated into systemic barriers that limited opportunities for entire communities. What happened to me on Flight 447 was not an isolated incident, she told the committee, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of boardroom presentations and public speaking. It was part of a pattern of discrimination that affects countless Americans who work hard, pay their taxes, and contribute to their communities, but are still treated as second-class citizens when they try to access the same services and accommodations that others take for granted." End quote. The questioning that followed was thorough and sometimes hostile, with some committee members suggesting that she was exaggerating the significance of what they characterized as a simple customer service error. But Elise had anticipated these challenges, and her responses demonstrated both her business acumen and her deep understanding of how discrimination operated in corporate environments where policies could be selectively enforced based on unconscious CIN or conscious bias. Senator, if this was simply a customer service error, why was I the only platinum-level frequent flyer removed from my confirmed seat? Why wasn't the white businessman who took my place asked to provide documentation of his supposed higher status? And why did it take my brother's intervention as the flight captain to restore me to the seat I had legitimately purchased and confirmed? The exchange was covered extensively in business media, with many commentators noting how Elise's calm professionalism under pressure demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership qualities that had made her company successful. The contrast between her dignified responses and the sometimes aggressive questioning she faced only reinforced the public perception that she had been treated unfairly and that her brother's intervention had been both, quote, justified and necessary. Pacific Airways found itself under intense scrutiny following the congressional hearing, with civil rights organizations calling for boycotts and government regulators threatening investigations into their passenger service practices. The airline's stock price dropped significantly as investors worried about potential legal liability and reputational damage, forcing the company's leadership to take more aggressive action than their initial apology. And diversity training programs. The airline's new CEO, brought in specifically to address the crisis, announced a comprehensive reform program that included enhanced anti-discrimination training for all customer-facing employees, revised policies for handling passenger complaints and seating disputes, and the establishment of an independent oversight board to monitor compliance with equal treatment standards. More significantly, the company committed to promoting more people of color to senior management positions and partnering with minority-owned businesses for supply chain and service contracts. These changes were partly symbolic, designed to repair the company's damaged reputation and demonstrate commitment to equality, but they also had real practical effects for employees and passengers who had previously faced discrimination. The new training programs included specific scenarios based on the Morgan incident, teaching staff to recognize and avoid the kind of unconscious bias that had led to Elise being removed from her seat without justification. Marcus found himself at the center of these training programs, frequently asked to speak to groups of pilots and flight attendants about the importance of treating all passengers with equal respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived social status. His perspective as both a senior pilot and someone who had witnessed discrimination against his family member gave him unique credibility in these discussions, and his calm, professional approach helped other crew members understand how to handle similar situations without escalating conflicts unnecessarily. The authority we have as flight crew comes with responsibility, Marcus would tell these training groups. We're not just responsible for the mechanical safety of the aircraft, but for ensuring that every passenger feels safe and respected during their journey with us. When we allow discrimination to happen on our watch, we're failing in that responsibility and damaging the reputation of our profession. The impact of these changes extended beyond Pacific Airways, as other airlines implemented similar policies to avoid facing the kind of crisis that had cost Pacific Airways hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue and remediation costs. The incident became a case study in business schools, used to teach future managers about the importance of consistent policy enforcement and the financial risks associated with discriminatory practices. Elise's company continued to grow rapidly in the years following the incident, partly because of the increased visibility she'd gained from the media coverage, but primarily because of the excellence of her products and services. The Hartwell Industries contract had indeed opened doors to other Fortune 500 clients, who were impressed not just by her technical capabilities, but by her ability to handle crisis situations with grace and professionalism. The artificial intelligence solutions developed by Morgan Industries became industry standards in healthcare and education, helping hospitals improve patient outcomes and schools personalize learning for students from diverse backgrounds. Elise insisted that all of her company's products be tested for bias and designed to serve users equitably, understanding that technology could either perpetuate existing inequalities or help overcome them depending on how it was developed and implemented. Her success attracted attention from venture capital firms and potential acquirers, with several offering valuations that would have made her one of the wealthiest self-made women in America. But Elise chose to maintain control of her company, understanding that her independence was essential to maintaining her commitment to social impact alongside financial success. She did accept strategic investments that provided capital for expansion while preserving her decision-making authority and company culture. The scholarship program she established in memory of her parents became one of the largest privately funded education initiatives in the country, providing full college scholarships to students from low-income families who demonstrated academic excellence and leadership potential. Many of the scholarship recipients were young people of color who faced obstacles similar to those that Elise and Marcus had overcome, and she took personal satisfaction in providing them with opportunities that might not otherwise have been available. Marcus's career with Pacific Airways continued to flourish as the airline worked to repair its reputation and demonstrate its commitment to equality. He was promoted to senior management positions that allowed him to influence company culture and policies, ensuring that the lessons learned from his sister's experience were embedded in the organization's operating cabaret, procedures, and training programs. The siblings' relationship remained close despite their demanding careers and geographic separation, with regular phone calls and family gatherings that provided emotional support and strategic advice for their day. Respective challenges. They understood that their individual success was interconnected, that discrimination against one of them was an attack on both, and that their achievements created opportunities and expectations for other family members and community members who looked to them as examples of what was possible. Their parents, who had sacrificed so much to provide educational opportunities for their children, lived to see both of them achieve remarkable success in their chosen fields. The simple apartment in Oakland, where Elise and Marcus had shared a bedroom, became a place of pilgrimage for young people in the community who wanted to understand how two kids from modest circumstances had risen to positions of influence and authority in industries that had historically excluded people who looked like them. The story of Flight 4047 became part of the family mythology, told and retold at holiday gatherings and community events as an example of how individual courage and family loyalty could challenge institutional injustice. But it was always framed as just one incident in a larger struggle for equality and respect, a reminder that progress required constant vigilance and the willingness to speak up when others might choose silence or compliance. As the years passed, both siblings took on increasing roles as mentors and advocates for young people facing similar challenges in their education and career development. Elise established internship programs at her company, specifically designed to provide opportunities for students from underrepresented communities, while Marcus worked with aviation organizations to increase diversity in pilot training programs and airline management positions. Their efforts were part of a broader movement within American business to address historical inequalities and create more inclusive environments for employees and customers from all backgrounds. The changes were gradual and sometimes frustrating, but incidents like the one on Flight 4047 served as catalysts for conversations and policy changes that might not have occurred otherwise. The congressional testimony that Elise had provided became part of the legislative record that supported new federal regulations requiring transportation companies to maintain detailed records of customer service complaints and to demonstrate that their policies were being applied consistently across all passenger demographics. These regulations included specific provisions for investigating and addressing discrimination complaints, with significant financial penalties for companies that failed to meet compliance standards. The implementation of these regulations faced resistance from some industry groups, who argued that they imposed unnecessary administrative burdens and created liability risks that would increase costs for all customers. But the public support for stronger anti-discrimination enforcement was overwhelming, particularly after the Morgan incident had demonstrated how easily bias could operate even in highly regulated industries with stated commitments to equal treatment. Elise found herself frequently called upon to speak at industry conferences and diversity forums, sharing her perspective on how companies could build more inclusive cultures while maintaining operational efficiency and customer satisfaction. Her presentations always emphasized the business case for equality, demonstrating how discrimination was not just morally wrong but economically counterproductive for organizations that wanted to attract and retain the best talent and customers. Discrimination is bad for business, she would tell these audiences. When you treat customers unfairly, you lose not just their individual business, but the business of everyone in their networks who hears about their experience. When you create hostile environments for employees, you lose the contributions of people who could help your organization innovate and grow. Equality isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do." End quote. The message resonated with business leaders who were increasingly recognizing that diversity and inclusion were essential for competing in global markets and serving diverse customer bases. Companies that had previously viewed equality initiatives as compliance obligations began to see them as competitive advantages that could help them attract top talent and expand into new markets. Marcus's influence within the aviation industry grew as he took on leadership roles in professional organizations and regulatory bodies that set standards for pilot training and airline operations. His experience with the Flight 4047 incident gave him unique credibility when discussing the importance of consistent policy enforcement and respectful customer service. And his recommendations were taken seriously by industry leaders who wanted to avoid similar crises. The training programs he helped develop became models for other industries facing similar challenges with unconscious bias and discriminatory practices. The scenarios and role-playing exercises he designed were adapted for use in hotels, restaurants, retail stores, and other customer service environments where bias could affect the treatment that different customers are received. The long-term impact of the Morgan siblings' experience extended far beyond their individual careers or even the specific industry changes that resulted from their advocacy. Their story became part of a larger narrative about how progress happened in America, how individual courage combined with family support and community solidarity could challenge systems that seemed immutable and create opportunities for future generations. Young people who heard their story understood that success was possible despite obstacles, but also that success came with responsibilities to help others and to continue fighting for equality even after achieving personal security and recognition. The lesson was that individual achievement was not enough if it wasn't combined with efforts to create systemic change that would benefit others facing similar challenges. The scholarship recipients who benefited from Elise's Education Foundation often spoke about how her example had inspired them not just to pursue their own dreams, but to think about how their eventual success could be used to help others. Many of them went on to start their own businesses or nonprofit organizations, creating a multiplier effect that extended the impact of the original discrimination incident far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. The Flight 447 story became a case study not just in business schools, but in law schools, where it was used to teach future attorneys about how discrimination operated in practice, and how legal remedies could be combined with social pressure and economic incentives to create meaningful change. The incident demonstrated how individual experiences of bias could be transformed into broader policy changes when they were properly documented and advocated. As Elise and Marcus reached middle age, they could look back on their careers with satisfaction that they had not only achieved their personal goals, but had used their success to create opportunities and protections for others. The discrimination they had faced and challenged had become a catalyst for changes that would benefit countless people they would never meet, but whose experiences would be improved because of the courage they had shown in standing up for principle over convenience. The simple act of refusing to let his sister be humiliated had transformed Marcus from a skilled pilot into a symbol of how authority should be used to protect rather than oppress. The dignity with which Elise had handled both the discrimination and its aftermath had established her as a role model for professional excellence combined with social responsibility. Together, they had proven that family bonds, when combined with individual achievement and moral courage, could indeed challenge and change systems that seemed designed to perpetuate inequality and injustice.